kind of hi everyone. Kind of good afternoon. My name is Imran Valodia. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor for Climate Sustainability and Inequality at WITS, and also the Director of the Southern Center for Inequality Studies. I guess today it's with the kind of Southern Center for Inequality studies hat that I'm chairing this event, although it's of course not kind of unrelated to the work that WITS is doing around climate change in general. So I think one important kind of aspect of the climate kind of the climate change kind of debate that's been going on for the last few years is this kind of idea of a just transition. I think the words just transition are probably the most overused words over the last 10 years. And when I think about this, I kind of sometimes think, is the climate the kind of climate change community seriously thinking about kind of a just transition, or are they thinking about this as just another transition? And one important aspect of why I think it might be just another transition rather than a just transition is that most of the climate debate, as I see it at least, is kind of quite blind to kind of issues of gender and issues of care. And part of the reason for that is that the kind of economic model that we often apply to how we think about climate change is one that still kind of undervalues the kind of importance of care. And it's for this reason that the kind of center, with kind of generous support from the IDRC, has been doing kind of quite a bit of work on thinking through the gender dimensions of climate change, and especially focusing on the importance of care. So we're really proud today to be able to launch to launch this kind of climate and care nexus framework kind of that we've developed. So the way we're going to run the kind of event today is that my colleague Sonia Palazzi is going to present the kind of framework, which you'll find on our website. We're then going to have some responses to the framework that'll be made by Nanya Muller from the HSRC. I think many of you will know that Nanya's kind of leading the W20 process that's part of South Africa's hosting of the G20 today. So Nanya, we're really pleased to have you with us today. Thank you so much for making the time. And then we're going to shift on to Siobhan Reynolds, who's going to share some of her thoughts on this. So Siobhan's a climate scientist at WITS who has been doing lots of work on kind of thinking through kind of how care for the environmental system is kind of a core part of how we should think about climate change. We'll then finally pass on to Martha Melez from the IDRC. Martha's kind of over a long time been a great supporter of our work at SCIS, and in fact my own kind of relationship from a research perspective with Martha goes back to kind of a long time when we did some work on kind of gender and tax systems in the early 2000s. So Martha, thank you so much for your support, and we look forward to hearing to kind of hearing your thoughts. So with that, let me then pass on to Sonia. So kind of over to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction, Imran. I'm sharing my screen now. Thank you all for joining today. I'm really grateful to see some familiar faces, but also some new people. And yeah, this has been a year's worth of work. And I'll be sharing an overview of the paper, and I'll share a link and chat to the actual paper on the WITS website. I wanted to also give a special mention to the co-authors, Julia Taylor and Imran, as well as the Care Climate Working Group, who we've been working with, who took the time to review this framework over the past year, and their names are listed there. So thank you very much, everyone. So to start with a rationale for developing an understanding of the care climate nexus, both climate scientists and feminist social scientists are to some extent concerned with the well-being of people and the planet. But as we know, they belong to very different disciplines and use different tools of analysis. Within climate sciences discipline, there is a large amount of climate research that looks at essentially adding women to existing frameworks and policies. So, for example, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, have a gender action plan which was adapted in 2017. And that framework aims to enhance gender responsiveness of climate action and policy. Um, and this is in line with kind of many mainstream approaches to gender and climate change, which focuses more or less on including women in sectors or in kind of climate finance investments in decision-making bodies, etc. Feminist scholars, on the other hand, are producing analysis that goes beyond just adding women to existing policies. They have long kind of been concerned with highlighting the importance of care in economic and social systems and the asymmetric or disproportionate amount of care that women and girls do, much of which is unpaid. And they have analyzed the importance of care for human well-being as well as the functioning of our economies. So feminist scholars tend to think that climate scientists deal mainly in the abstract, such as like increases in global temperatures um, in the period since industrialization. But many climate scientists are more and more realizing that assessments of climate change need to be translated into tangible assessments of contemporary impacts on people, especially if action is to be taken to stop, the harmful climate changes. And so we're seeing more and more that climate scientists have begun to consider how poverty and inequality shape the impacts of climate change on livelihoods and the possibilities for resilience and adaptation. And so this working paper is a first step for us towards bringing these two disciplines together, climate scientists and feminist social scientists, because they both have an interest in analyzing the forces that are shaping the care of planet and people, and where necessary and possible, challenging these forces and potentially changing them. So this paper and other think pieces that were written by the Care Climate Working Group seeks to unpack some of these ideas on the significance of care and climate in this intersection and its implications for climate action. So our conceptualization of care is drawn from feminist scholarship, who define care for people as the provision of assistance and support for people to carry out their daily activities such as eating, dressing, bathing, learning, exercising, resting. All of these are essential for our well-being, and for exercising our capabilities. And this really, I think, captures the relational aspect of care because it recognizes the agency of the people who are being cared for, as well as those providing care. Because we know that as humans, we need care and support throughout our lives, especially at the beginning and the end of our lives. But even if we are able-bodied adults, with a paid job, even those people need support and assistance, and care from family and friends to live and thrive. So recognizing this allows a scope for kind of reciprocity in providing care, and implicit in that is a lot of intergenerational contracts or um, relationships, care relationships. However, we know that gender and other inequalities means that reciprocity is generally asymmetric, and most of the care work is carried out by women and girls, and care is provided usually without paid in families and households and communities, and is generally underpaid in other sectors. And so we know that those providing care, whether paid or unpaid, are undervalued, um, and their own care needs are neglected. So good quality care essentially means providing assistance and support in ways that accord dignity and respect to recipients of care. It recognizes their capabilities, the role that they play in sustaining their lives and their human rights. And so feminist economists often give a distinction between direct care work, which are activities that involve close or personal emotional interaction, such as childcare and elder care, and indirect care work, which is care that provide support for direct care, such as cooking, washing, cleaning, collecting water, and firewood. Um, However, many feminist economists argue that almost all activities can be understood as providing support for direct care. So not only providing meals, but also, producing food, the production of like cooking appliances, energy, steel, etc., all to some degree support direct care. So if you call all of those activities indirect care, then almost the entirety of the economy would, to some extent, impact indirect care. And because of this, many feminists, such as particularly Diane Nelson, argue that the category of indirect care is more useful if it's applied only to unpaid activities that take place in households and communities. Oops. So one of the crucial interventions that we highlight in this working paper is that existing frameworks for care must include caring for the environment, caring for animals, caring for communal spaces, and resources such as, water, gardens, and forests have been identified by feminist scholars as part of indirect care. This is, most visible in the context of subsistence economies, but we argue that a more expansive understanding of care for the earth, for the planet, is needed, especially for existing economic frameworks. So, not to confine care for the planet to a subset of care for people. Um, and in this respect, we draw from the conceptual definition of care that came from Joan Tronto, um, which sees caring as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can all live in it as well as possible. So, caring for the earth and the environment is an approach that respects the planet as a living system, respects planetary boundaries, and recognizes and supports the possibilities for environmental systems to renew themselves. And yeah, we also make a note of how Joan Tronto's definition of care, this expansive view of care beyond human to human care, um, to include care for the environment, is reflective of many indigenous cultures, um, that have, a historical reverence for land and for nature, and reverence respect for land and nature. As I mentioned, the question of economic systems and how they value care is essentially a mirror image of how nature is cared for. And in this diagram, um, taken from Dengler and Strunk, provides, I think, a useful visual representation of the ways that the existing economic system, which places an emphasis on monetary value on the top, which they call the monetized economy. But what is not visible is the unaccounted, unseen, hidden base of the triangle, which, is nature and care. And together, they refer to as the maintenance economy. So, this hidden maintenance economy is crucial because the monetized economy would simply not exist without the unpaid, unseen labor, as well as the natural resources that nature provides. So our framework attempts to expand on this diagram to show the links and the relationships, um, between these three, um, main variables of the ends of this triangle. So this conceptual framework, maps out the different ways that, that the variables that I spoke about intersect, and it's a conceptual framework, so it really is a visual representation of how these variables, the relationship between these variables. And the framework is adapted, from different existing conceptual frameworks, but most most of it is drawn from, this paper, called the World Health Organization's Driving Force, which looked at the relationship between climate and healthcare specifically. So this is the conceptual framework, and it shows the interaction between these three main variables: the economic and social cultural system in the orange, the effects that this has on the climate, which is the blue box, and care inequalities in the purple box. I'll start with the orange section, which is the economic and social cultural system. And this is comprised of two reinforcing determinants, which we call structural and intermediate determinants. The structural determinants represent the socioeconomic and political contexts. So, how governments are organized, for example, what macroeconomic frameworks are in place. And we argue that this is in many ways is determined also by various axes of inequality and power. So basically, as an example, how governments are organized does not exist in a vacuum, and is a product of various axes of inequality and power. And together, these two factors um, make up the structural determinants, which in turn determines what type of economic and social models are constructed. In this case, most of the models significantly contribute to GHG emissions, like the existing energy models. So the structural determinants and the intermediate determinants make up the economic and social cultural system. And we argue they structurally undervalue care and nature, which leads to the depletion of the environment and the depletion of human well-being, and capacities. In terms of the depletion of the environment, so the green arrow that goes to the blue box, we categorize these effects as direct and indirect effects, which many, I'm sure, in this call are familiar with. In terms of the effects on care and care inequalities, we argue that providing good quality care for the planet means that we must respect natural resources. But it is hard to provide this type of care if your survival is in immediate jeopardy because of a lack of material and social resources. And so social and economic inequality further depletes human well-being, um, and contributes to the conflicts that arise from the immediate pressures to care for your family, your children, which in turn may conflict with the care that you're able to provide for nature. So the economic and social cultural system may force you to, buy cheap food produced using pesticides, that harm wildlife, and that are processed in industrialized ways, and that generates pollution and, intensify global warming. And pollution in turn harms health and intensifies care needs. And we um, distinguish between direct impacts and indirect in the impacts of this in the purple box. So we argue, as I say, that economic and social cultural systems systematically undermine people's capacity to care for the environment, and that people's capabilities are depleted and degraded through work that is exhausting, and through deprivation of essentials. Um, and at the same time, capabilities of environmental systems are degraded and depleted through over extraction of resources. And lastly, on this graph, while we were refining this framework, um, we originally had history, this question of where does history fit into this framework. So contexts such as colonialism and historical degradation of land and natural resources. Initially, this was part of the structural determinants. Um, However, we thought that it would make more sense as a kind of overarching effect that persists in many, known and unknown ways. And so hence we have that black box around the entire framework that is called the systems of privilege and oppression. It includes things like capitalism, and patriarchy as important kind of variables that are important in our understanding of the general undervaluing of care and nature. And so after presenting this framework to many knowledgeable partners, both scientists and feminist economists, it became clear that we needed to think in a way that kind of moved away from an economic system that depleted nature and humans' capabilities to care for each other, um, towards something that prioritizes replenishment and regeneration. Um, and this is still kind of preliminary work, but essentially thinking about a system that values nature and care equally. And this is what these two graphs are attempting to represent. Um, so on the right, using the three variables, we kind of remade that graph for it to be more circular. And for the relationship between A and B, the economic and social cultural systems and the consequences for the climate and care, as we've argued, these are similar coexisting processes, and macroeconomic policies and institutions that prioritize the health of the environment, as well as access to care infrastructure, improves livelihood outcomes, and reduces vulnerability to food shortages or water security, for example. And in this way, climate change policy, which we put it in the middle there, has an important role to um, to be transformative in the sense that it addresses all of these three um, systems, for lack of a better word. Oops. Okay. And so then the question is, what kind of climate policy do we need? What does a transformative climate policy look like? And what emerged from our research is that, as I said, what we need to think about climate policy is not in isolation from broader macroeconomic policy, because underlying the degradation and depletion of people and planet is essentially a finance driven economic system that values capabilities primarily for the monetized economy, whether that money takes the form of private profits or revenues for the states. And we argue that the focus of climate policy needs to be to support the replenishment and regeneration, which means creating caring economies that prioritizes well-being rather than financial returns. And this means that all institutions and enterprises, whether private or public, should be required to fulfill a duty of care. And attempts to mobilize finance for investment, particularly in mitigation, but also in adaptation, we argue can only achieve limited success when the economic system itself is governed in ways that prioritize extracting financial returns rather than fostering the well-being of people and planets. And what I'm saying now is not new. Feminist social scientists have been developing these ideas about what creating a caring economy looks like and what it means. And so our conceptual framework hopes to advance calls for the bullet points you see there, reorienting the economy, changing ownership models so that they're more democratized, change how the government raises and spends money. Expanding social infrastructure should be at the center of fiscal policy. And essentially, we need long-term public investments in clean and renewable energy without replicating inequalities that we have, that are a result of, you know, the privatization of care infrastructure and care services. And we hope that this framework advances a global green and caring economy that uh, that advances a just transition, which is what Imran was talking about. A just transition for workers in industries that will be eventually run down, and emphasizes, you know, that marginalized and precarious workers must be prioritized in the creation of decent work in ways that proactively considers gender, race, caste, and ability. And it's important that, you know, scaled up long-term and consistent public investments in care service, care work, the care economy is advanced, is put forward. And that is the climate policy recommendations that we made in the paper, and also concludes my presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing people's thoughts to it and recommendations. Thank you.
Right, Sonia, thank you. Thank you so much for kind of presenting that so so kind of crisply. It's a longish paper. It's almost a year of work of a large group. So a kind of remarkable achievement, Sonia, to present it in the 20 minutes that you had. I'm going to move straight on to Nanya, who's going to share with us some of her thoughts kind of about the paper. Kind of, as I said in the introduction, Nanya's at the HSRC and is very prominently leading kind of South Africa's W20 processes. So over to you, Nanya.
Thank you so much, Imran. Thank you for the invitation. I remember meeting you personally in Rio last year at the Care 20. And thank you to Sonia for a beautiful presentation. I really think that this is the kind of evidence that we need to guide policymakers. And therefore, I want to really congratulate you on the work that's been done from many perspectives. I mean, as a feminist, dare I call myself, you know, I was very interested in the ethic of care, the feminists of the 1960s bringing on board this issue of the ethic of care and the fact that care is really not valued because it's you know, a feminine characteristic, whereas justice in the traditional sense of the word is a more masculine characteristic. So we certainly do not value care sufficiently, and that has to do with the way in which a society is structured. It has to do with stereotypes, with discrimination, and all of those things that we are talking about at the level of Women 20 as well. So just for context, Women 20 is an engagement group of the group of 20, and we are solely responsible for foregrounding gender equality and women's economic empowerment into the G20 processes. So we have delegates from South Africa and across the G20 countries, and we're looking at ways of bringing issues to the fore that really matter by advocating for them, by creating awareness, and of course, by making recommendations that would be considered by the leaders. We're currently working on these recommendations, and two of the areas that we work on are very closely related to what you've been talking about now. And that is, the climate justice issue. So the just transition is very much a part of the work that we're doing now, how it affects women, how women can lead, how women can benefit from better ways of thinking and doing things, as well as the care economy. So in terms of the care economy, I mean, there's many things that have been written and said about the care economy recently, but I think it still needs a lot of attention. We still need to do a lot of work in respect of the care economy because a lot of it is invisible. So we need to bring those invisible aspects of our lives into the public space, into the public sphere, where we can talk about them, where we understand them, when we understand the value of these things to ourselves, to our societies, and of course to our planet. So, you know, we have a situation where we have both paid and unpaid care work in the world, but often even care work itself, if paid, is not paid well, and so there is a form of exploitation almost that goes on. And one of the things that come up in Women 20 is domestic workers, for instance, or farm workers. You know, the issues around these workers being exploited, although they play a very significant part of our economy and our society. So I think we do need caring systems, not only caring people, and care needs to be at the center and not at the periphery of how we do things. So I fully endorse the outcomes of your research. And I think that we need to change our ways of thinking, which is precisely what you're arguing here around, for example, the well-being of people versus the well-being of the planet, or everything really being integrated. It's a holistic system. And well-being comes into the fore here as well. So if we start valuing care and being caring, then obviously we're going to start valuing women and girls more as well, because women disproportionately carry the burden, an unfair word perhaps in some circumstances, of care within societies. And yeah, so it's all about a mindset, a way in which we think and do things, and bringing to the fore inequalities as well as preventing unfair discrimination within societies. So we have an issue with women being undervalued, care being undervalued, and we need to do something about that. So, I mean, South Africa's inclusive economic growth policy is at the center of the national agenda. It's also at the center of the G20 agenda around solidarity, equality, and sustainability. So under the G20 South African presidency, these priorities are taking forward some of what Brazil did last year, as well as India and Indonesia the year before. But what Brazil did in the sphere of W20 around the care economy was very powerful. And in fact, I had mentioned that I met Imran at a Care 20 meeting. It was on the sidelines of some of the other summits that were happening, where we really had an in-depth look at care in its various forms within society and within the world. And what I'm thinking of is our value for working as Women 20 under the South African presidency is Ubuntu. So it's about interrelatedness, interrelationships between people, but also people and the planet again, and that we cannot achieve any real prosperity without caring for ourselves and without caring for one another and the planet. And so this value of Ubuntu makes me think about care as well, because it is an interrelationship-based, communal-based concept, value, a philosophy that we do rely on as South Africans when we talk about global affairs, for example, such as in these G20 multilateral spaces. So it's a very important time for us in South Africa. And I think the more that we talk about these issues, the more we are likely to be able to continue this conversation beyond South Africa's G20 presidency. As we all know, we are moving into a US G20 presidency at the end of this year in December. And so we have a chance. We have a chance here. We have a window in which to put things on the table, such as the fact that care work should be valued more, and this should be emphasized and amplified wherever it can be. And so we all have a job to do, really, and that is to interrogate these concepts, to look at the relationship between care and health, care and well-being, care and gender-based violence. How do we think about other people? Why are we a violent society? Why do we abuse women and children within the society? Do we actually value care in the way that we should? And these are the kinds of platforms that we need currently. So it's really valuable to be doing this and to bring people together, to bring us together, to listen to the outcomes of this really important research project, and to bring other voices into play as well. So I know that, well, the W20 is an engagement group, so we're independent of government. We consist of business, civil society, and academics and researchers like you and I. And, you know, we also work alongside the ministerial track, which is Women's Economic Empowerment Working Group. And they have the care economy as one of their 3 priorities as well. So as you can see, it is receiving a lot of attention, and attention that it very much deserves. What I loved about Sonia towards the end of Sonia's presentation was really around not only needing a care economy, as we call it, but a caring economy, which is a little bit different, I think, because we're not only focusing on the importance of valuing care work, but the importance of actually valuing the gift, the moments of caring that we experience within society. And it can make a difference to policy. And it is an economic issue. I think we really need squarely to understand that this is an economic issue, and that women's well-being, women's happiness is needed for economies to thrive. No matter what, that is something that has come through in research very often for a number of decades now, is that including women in the conversation, including women in anything, parliament, businesses, we are making the world a better place. And that's just the beginning and the end of the message from my side. But I just really, again, want to thank you for the invitation. Thank you for being able to participate as the head of delegation of Women 20, as a feminist who cares about care. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Right. Thank you so much for those encouraging words. Nadia, I'm going to move straight on then to Siobhan. So Siobhan's a climate scientist in the science faculty at Wits University, who's been doing some work with SAIs around this care climate work. So over to you, Siobhan.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this paper launch. I am going to profess that I am still a naive care scholar. I came to this actually via Sonia and Imran and Julia presenting this work, nearly a year ago. And since then, I've become fairly obsessed with this concept because it relates so much, not only to me as a woman, but also to sort of Mother Nature and this care for this planet. And I just want to congratulate the team at SCIS for putting together what I think is such a complex framework representing such a complex issue, and to try to get all those links and feedbacks and levers together, and to really think so deeply about all of the aspects that involve climate and care. I think you've just done an incredibly amazing job. It's so valuable. And it just really reminds us that, you know, climate change touches every one of our lives and on a daily basis. And, you know, it puts, again, the most vulnerable people at risk, but maybe not only people, it's also our ecosystems. And it's something I really appreciate about the entire paper, is this thinking and framing about caring economies and really thinking holistically about, you know, social care and environmental care as underpinning this economic system and everything we need to to achieve in terms of climate resilience. So I find this work so deeply inspiring as a scientist, and that's really yeah, it's so inspiring as a scientist, and the parallels that I've seen between the work that ACIS is doing and some of our own thinking as biologists, climate scientists, conservationists. There's so much overlap, and it's really wonderful to think about how these disciplines can come together. And so I just wanted to touch on, so 3 things Sonia sort of asked me to reflect on. So I'm going to put on a more of a sciencey hat and a research hat. And she really wanted me to think about what this framework would mean for, in terms of research, and really in terms of advancing care climate scholarship, some of the methodological innovations that have emerged from this, and then also what it means for interdisciplinary research and how to move forward. And I actually just want to say that in terms of advancing the scholarship, I think that this work is quite foundational, in that it challenges the current sort of climate change paradigms, which I think focus a lot on pattern and process. And, you know, Imran, I think, maybe touched on that in the beginning of, and Sonia actually, on like shifting climate systems. And what it really does is move this climate research beyond this sort of focus on the physical to thinking more about relational, institutional, and structural dimensions of climate change. And when I was thinking about this presentation this morning, I thought, you know, this is happening in biological systems as well. When we think about climate change, we often think about extreme events, droughts, floods, hurricanes, and we've been confronted with some of that in the news this week. And the same kind of happens in biological systems. So increasing heat waves have led to sort of mass die-offs of birds and bats. And these are headlines we see in Australia and South Africa. But it's not only about these extreme events. And I think that's something that this framework is helping us to unpack a bit. And so I'm going to take an example from birds, because I'm also an ornithologist, and talk a little bit about some research in the Kalahari. And here scientists have been looking at nesting success across an increasingly heating Kalahari throughout the entire breeding season. And what they find is that it's not about these extreme heat exposures, but it's sort of the number of days above certain temperature thresholds that lead to nest failures or fewer chicks emerging from the nests. And why this is happening is because birds are actually excellent parents. They are very caring parents, but they are trading off caring for their young because they're trying to avoid lethal dehydration because it's too hot for them to forage. And these are the same things that are happening within our human systems. It's these long-term, chronic, often what we think of as indirect effects that are slow building and becoming increasingly widespread, that are affecting our own human physiology, our time use, our mental health, and it's actually challenging our ability to care. And so what I can take away from this as a biologist and reading this framework is that I think that's something that's emerged from me is this framework almost redefines vulnerability in many ways, and it shifts this idea of being vulnerable only because you're exposed to really understanding that there's that vulnerability can come through time, and that this is also something we really need to be thinking about in this climate care space. Is it's not just about big impacts now, it's about how this is going to build through time and affect these systems, and the idea that we need to start building in resilience and adaptability to these issues as they emerge. So that's something I think was really striking about the framework. And then also just thinking about the nature, social care dimensions, is that in some instances, if we are facing similar challenges, perhaps there's also similar interventions, and perhaps there's also win-wins. And I think there's a lot of learning that can happen across these different sectors, where we can definitely share our knowledge and insights, and potentially think of really innovative, different kinds of solutions that are not only top-down, but maybe driven through bottom-up kinds of initiatives. And so for me, the framework really foregrounds care within research, and I think that it challenges current climate change science in that it looks at climate change in a far more inclusive, grounded, and like really realistic way. And then just some thoughts on the innovation aspects of the framework. So as an ecologist, I really like systems diagrams, and we are systems thinkers, and we like to see all the boxes with all the arrows come together. And I think that the team has done such a beautiful job again at like distilling what is an incredibly complex system into these core ideas, and showing the linkages and feedbacks across that. And in terms of research, having feedbacks and linkages is really useful because it allows us to do hypothesis driven work and make predictions about how we think the system is going to react. And so I think there's a lot of novel research that can come from having done this conceptual work. But again, having those feedbacks and the linkages and levers also in place, I think is really excellent in terms of how we think about interventions and where we intervene. So which link in the system, which lever do we pull to get the maximum change within our system? And like without having somebody put all this work into developing that conceptual framework, that would be quite tough. And so I think as a policy making tool, thinking about what is the best lever to pull, what is the simplest lever to pull, maybe from both the top and both the bottom. I think that this framework is really groundbreaking in helping us think through that. And then finally, I guess the last point Sonia wanted me to talk about was interdisciplinarity. And I think that's just inherent in that it's going to take all sorts to solve these issues. But I think it's more than that. And it's not really just about disciplines coming together to have conversations, because we talk about interdisciplinarity so much in academia. And really often it just means, a scientist trying out a social science project. But really it's actually about coming together and almost creating new disciplines, creating new language, challenging existing frameworks. And as a researcher, this is obviously an exciting place to be. But it's also a scary place, and it's going to take a lot of bravery, and it's going to ask us to be bold, to stand up, to challenge our disciplinary silos and our disciplinary frameworks. And I couldn't think of a better group of people than women to go forth and fly the flag for carrying out this interdisciplinary research and driving this process forward. So yeah, I just want to say absolutely amazing job. I really think that the framework challenges our current paradigms. It synthesizes care, science, and justice in such an excellent way, such a visionary and grounded way. And I really hope that it's taken up, and that we see some of your excellent policy interventions listened to, Sonia. So yeah, thank you very much.
Right, Siobhan, thank you so much for that. I think one of our objectives in kind of doing this work and kind of writing up the framework was to kind of really influence the kind of climate science community. So I'm really pleased to hear that we have our first kind of influenced person on board. So thank you for that, Siobhan. I'm going to now move on to the third discussant, Lebogang Molaisis from the Presidential Climate Commission. She has worked in the past kind of leading climate change work kind of in the trade union movement, and kind of a great supporter of the work that we do at SCIS as well. So kind of over to you, Lebo.
Thank you very much, Imran, and thank you to your team at SCIS. If there is background noise, I do apologize. I am at the Green Hydrogen Summit, so there's lots of hustle and bustle everywhere. I just want to take this opportunity to thank the team at SCIS, always extending an invitation for us to make an input, and just to congratulate you guys. I don't think you understand how groundbreaking this is, especially in the arena of climate justice and the just transition. Everybody is running around tracking emissions and trying to see how best to reduce them, and nothing wrong with that, but an overemphasis on all of those sort of emission reduction activities take away the really transformative impact a just transition can have for our society, valuing something as historically invisible as care work in the household. So there's this expectation, or society views as care work as it's invisible, it's undervalued, and because women apparently are born with the natural instinct and they just generally want to participate in care work in the household, and just how undervalued women generally are in our society, it's so easy to look past these issues and not realize that, you know, we are in a critical moment in our society as we seek decarbonization, and not just decarbonization, but really a transformation in our relations with industry, in our relations with nature, and in our relations with issues that prehistorically have been a challenge for us. So this framework, Sonia and your team, it brings the facts to life for a subject that is constantly ignored within our discussions when it comes to issues related to climate. So the climate care nexus and this conceptual framework, I think, it represents an innovation, really, in feminist informed approaches to understand the interdependence between climate change and the organization of care work, particularly from a global south perspective, which is important. It challenges dominant climate policy paradigm that marginalizes or completely ignores care work, especially unpaid and undervalued labor, largely done by women, racialized and marginalized groups. So I'm really excited by the potential of particularly this framework and the benefits that it will unlock when it comes to further analysis, looking at how do we quantify the co-benefits, particularly when we look at climate as well as care work. So really kudos to you for embedding care as a core axis for both climate analysis as well as policy design. I do come at this discussion from the point of view of a person who works in the policy environment. So this is the basis on which I look at this work from. I really found it really foundational that the framework defines care in both the narrow, interpersonal, and expanded ecological and collective terms, really drawing on Joan Tronter's ethics of care and eco-feminist thoughts. It positions care as everything we do to maintain and continue and repair our world. One of the things that the paper highlights is just how foundational care work is to the economy of our country. Sonia and team, a co-benefits analysis emanating from this work is going to be important, especially when we look at the economic benefits care work has for our society. Usually for people working in policy, the numbers matter. So just making the case of a co-benefits analysis and how foundational care work is to our economy, I think is something that would definitely add to this work. And I think also making the point that care work is differentially distributed, and again, this is shaped by gender, race, class, and geography, and just highlighting how differentially distributed it is helps those of us who are in policy to understand where interventions are needed and where they will land best. And also just making the point that care work is undermined by climate change impacts and austerity policies. So finding ourselves in a situation where there is constraints on the fiscus and currently being austerity policies, this hampers this hampers the work that we are trying to do in making care work more valued, and also just making the point that essentially for climate adaptation, loss and damage response, and long-term resilience, you are making the point to demonstrate just how care work is important. And I've looked at some of the stuff that's coming in terms of recommendations from this report. So definitely when we're making our recommendations around green jobs and technologies, we can't forget within that scope to value care labor and not to assume technocratic neutrality when we look at our work. I also kind of looked at, especially when looking at responses in terms of the work that we do on climate, looking at how climate finance can be tailored to boost investments in care systems. So how climate finance can help channel more investment in health, water, education, and social services. is something that should definitely be focused on. And these are essential climate infrastructure and must be definitely resourced at scale. I've also sort of enjoyed looking at, what potential exists in terms of, investments that can go into care work in our society, and how this could benefit, how this could benefit our women particularly. I've recently come across the concept of care credits. So how we can look at climate finance and through grant financing, allocate care credits for people who are participating in care work at home, while we are seeking to transition them to other economic opportunities if they do wish to take advantage of them. So I'm keenly waiting for some of the work that will come up as people explore how grant financing from climate finance could unlock care credits. I just wanted to come to this issue of data and management, because like I said, in the policy landscape, the numbers matter. And I think a nice sort of next leg to this work is definitely quantifying the care burden of climate change. As women lose their full-time jobs due to disaster and climate change, and they have to go back home and take on care responsibilities, what is the impact? Looking at how, if there is a devastation, how that adds on to its care work. So it would be good to kind of see that quantified in real numbers, so that, better cases can be made for social security support. And again, this idea related to care credit. So I think I'm going to leave it there. The background noise has also picked up quite a bit, but thank you very much for inviting me to make reflections on this, and really keen to see how we can get to the next leg of the co-benefits analysis and the quantification of the burdens and the care work burden that is increased on women, and how we can start to now quantify this so that we can start to really do some more analysis to really make the case to policymakers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lebogang. Kind of really appreciate your thoughts from the policy space, as it were, and thank you for doing this while you at kind of at a PCC event. We really appreciate your time. So we have about 10 minutes for kind of questions or thoughts that kind of anyone would like to share. We've been trying to respond, or kind of, at least I should say, Sonia has been trying to respond to the questions and the comments on the chair, kind of on the chat. But if someone would like to raise kind of any questions, share kind of any thoughts kind of outside of the chat, there's some time now for people to speak. So if you can just raise your hand, and then I'm going to ask Cash to move you from the kind of attendees into a space where you can ask your question. So if there's any questions or thoughts, please can you raise your hand? I'm not seeing any.
Can I respond
Yeah.
a question? Yes, so there was a question in the Q&A about whether this care is included in the capitalist economy, which by nature is self-centered, competitive, and survival of the fittest based on profit making. And yes, precisely. And we wanted to show that in the framework with the black box around, which includes capitalism. And one of the recommendations that we make is, well, two. One is around reorienting the economy So putting well-being above profit, and there was also a question about a well-being economy. That too would be important to value care in our economy. So moving away from, for example, the main economic objective to be GDP growth, but to be towards well-being. And then the second recommendation we make is around a change in ownership models, which implies that we need to democratize ownership of land and natural resources and basic services. And in many ways, that is counter to a capitalist, self-centered view of the economy.
Right, Sonia, thanks for that. I see there's an interesting question on the chat from Karen Kochi. I hope I'm kind of pronouncing the name correctly. And the question is, how do you see the role of men in this? Nanya, I see you've kind of already had a go at answering. So let me see if you
Yes.
want to expand. Then over to you, Nanya.
Sorry about that. Finding my camera and my sound. We shouldn't see men as separate to this, because care isn't, that's what we're trying to say, right? Care isn't women's business. It's everybody's business. And so that's why we need to make sure that men are part of this conversation and do not see themselves as separate from this conversation, because it is not about men and women as separate entities. It is about our responsibility as people to ourselves, one another, and the planet. And so men's responsibility is everywhere and in everything. And a little joke there saying, sharing of care work. But, it is true that women carry the majority amount, especially of unpaid care, but also of paid care. So men need to be part of this conversation. Allies need to be part of this conversation. And obviously, we need critical thinking around it. But the point I really want to make is that it's not something separate from men's lives. We're all tied up in this together. Thanks.
Perhaps I could share a thought on that question from personal experience as a father of twins. I think one of the important issues in kind of highlighting the value of care is that there's a dimension of it that is kind of hard work, but there's also a dimension to it that is very rewarding. And I think that part of the kind of behavioral change that is needed is required on the side of getting men to understand the kind of rewarding elements of it, as well as the burden elements of it. And I think that's an important part of why it is important for us to highlight the value of care work. Any other questions anyone wants to deal with on the chat? I see there's a hand up. A hand up from Ntokozo. Tash, can you help us with that? And also a hand up from Professor Gladhill. So let's start with Ntokozo. Tash, can you shift Ntokozo? Yeah, there she is. Over to you, Ntokozo.
Hi, Imran, thank you so much. And then thanks to Sonia and all the her co-authors that have contributed to such a very important conceptual framework. I just wanted to, I hold a PhD in higher education studies that has got an interdisciplinarity element as well, because it brings together issues of climate change as well as the issues of curriculum, especially in the environmental science. But I'm also actively, a multidisciplinary researcher, by nature, because I research the restoration issues when it comes to, in particular, I'm currently researching, the butterflies, but I am getting more close to realizing that I hope you will not hear me badly, Sonia, but when the climate change effects already arrive, and all the impacts that it comes with to women, there is already an array of other factors that are already contributing from different angles to the vulnerability or to the situation whereby women are carrying, the biggest, a burden of the climate change impacts. So I was wanting to understand, I'm not too sure if I've missed it from the presentation. I just wanted to see to understand if does this conceptual framework brings all those factors and they are intersections or they are interrelation, and how all these factors jointly work together to contribute to the vulnerability or to this gendered or to this one-sided vulnerability, as we see and agree and admit that indeed women suffer the most, simply because there's also other factors that are contributing to that. But I wanted to check if the conceptual framework does, highlight or maybe get into details, with regards to the all these variety or various factors, and then maybe it can then the framework can then maybe end up bringing, surfacing the maybe the, I don't know whether what you call, but this working togetherness of these factors, and how they work together to increase the burden, for women. I'm not too sure if I'm understood, but basically that's the question I'm wanting to raise. Thanks, Imran.
Thank you so much. Let's take the second question as well from Professor Glenhill, and then Sonia can answer. Titesh?
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks very
Hi.
much. I noticed in the chat, and can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly.
Great. That there was a note about how we incorporate these things, these concepts, these groundbreaking concepts in our own approach. And I would like to comment that it's easy, for example, in the physics community, for me to see how to take this forward, because like other basic sciences, it's consciously and very deeply involved in the gender science of physics, for example, of education, of development, how we think about these in the lecture room and the classroom. And the community is deeply involved in climate change, sustainability, rejuvenation. One can see easily how these work in the monetized economy, but I can see now how to incorporate the care economy quite easily. And it's not unforeseeable that basic sciences contribute to understanding the care economy. Think, for example, of complex systems and the way that network models can be applied to human relationships, for example, in the care economy. And I just wanted to put forward that idea and say, I think is a very exciting development, and I can see how to use it. Thanks.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Any thoughts from your side, Sonia, or any other members of the panel? Right, Sonia?
Yes, thank you, Ntokozo. I agree that the effects of climate change kind of compound onto each other. And it's difficult to, or rather, there's not much research that demonstrates the ways that they compound each other and affect the burden of care. As a start to this research is more of a conceptual it's more conceptual in terms of its thinking and how these two concepts link. What we're doing now is actually doing action-based research or action-based evidence generating research, where we are working with a number of organizations across the continent who work in various communities at the intersection of care and climate. And the aim really is to foreground what you are referring to see precisely what are the different climate change effects on the burden of care in different communities. What are the similarities? What are the differences? So that's work that we are currently doing, kind of empirical analysis and case studies on exactly what the care climate nexus looks like for communities.
Great. Thank you so much, Sonia, and thanks to everyone for all of the feedback and the comments, both in speaking and in the chat. We're really grateful. I just wanted to highlight that you can find the paper on the link that Sonia shared. It's also important to just share that kind of in addition to the work specifically on the framework, the larger group of people, including our advisory group that supported the work, many of us wrote kind of think pieces that highlight different dimensions of the care climate nexus. Those think pieces are all available on our website. They also were all published in the conversation. Longer versions of those think pieces, kind of Sonia's kindly putting together into one book, and we should be able to share that to share that quite soon. So look out for that. Look out also for the research that Sonia mentioned that we're doing kind of on an ongoing basis, and kind of hopefully further work that we'll be doing kind of in this area. So none of this would have been possible without the generous support of the IDRC, and without the generous encouragement and support from Martha Males of the IDRC. So I'm going to now pass things on to Martha for her to make the closing remarks. Martha, kind of over to you.
Thank you, Imran. I really enjoyed the presentation and the rich discussion. Thank you, Sonia, Julia, Imran, and team for this very insightful and timely work, and for unpacking, as many of the colleagues here just said, the complexities of the care and climate linkages in a way that makes visible the underlying social, economic, political forces that are at play and that need to be reckoned with. So really kudos to you. So as mentioned, my name is Martha Males. I'm a senior program specialist at Canada's International Development Research Centre, IDRC. I'm based at our headquarters in Ottawa. For those who are not familiar with IDRC, just briefly, that we're part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts, and we fund research and innovation in and by the Global South to facilitate the use of the knowledge generated, and we also mobilize global alliances to build a more sustainable and inclusive world. So in very short, this is who we are. So I'm really happy to be part of this conversation today and to be supporting this work. Many of the points discussed here resonates with why it was important for IDRC to fund this work and how we're building on this foundational work. So I will say a few words on that by way of offering concluding remarks. So as the WITS publication and the discussion we just had highlighted, the world faces a dual crisis, right, of care and climate change. Care work sustains families, societies, and the economy, and yet, as it was highlighted, it remains largely unrecognized, undervalued, and disproportionately shouldered by women and girls. And this is causing unsustainable stress, as we've seen recently, more vividly during the COVID pandemic. So climate change is exacerbating this by increasing the demands on care, weakening care systems, and as well, many climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies can inadvertently increase care work. And if that's the case, it also has the potential to worsen gender inequalities. Sonia made it very clear on how climate change and care are intertwined. Now, there's a lot of progress in integrating gender equality into climate change policies and programs in recent years. However, despite this, and as was mentioned, the link between care work, climate change, and environmental sustainability remains invisible to many policymakers and practitioners. At the same time, care work and care workers are crucial to climate change solutions because they strengthen community resilience. They support vulnerable populations during climate impacts, and they contribute to sustainable practices to protect the ecosystem. The big question is, how can we harness this and how can we drive societal transformation in the midst of this? And this is, I think, the gist of what we were getting at during the conversation. So to achieve this it's necessary that social transformation must address the intersecting impacts of climate change and care crisis. So I think what's becoming increasingly evident, and as the discussion we just had underpins, siloed approaches that tackle these issues separately will not enable us to move forward in any sustainable way. We need integrated approaches, especially in low and middle income countries, to address these interconnected issues that are confronting us. What is IDRC doing in this regard? So leveraging over a decade of investment in feminist research and movements, IDRC is supporting research that aims to unravel the links between care work and climate action, and really highlighting the essential role care work plays in building resilient communities. So in addition to the work done by the WITS University, which we're very happy to be supporting, we also recently partnered with Asia Foundation and the Fundación Avina to produce a report exploring the integrated solutions for a just transition that advances climate and care justice. And building on this foundational work, we're currently developing a regional research hub as centers of excellence to advance more robust and context-specific intervention aimed at really driving gender transformative climate action and reshaping policies that address the unequal social organization of care. We believe that this is really important to provide a platform for gender and care advocates and for climate scientists to come together to deepen data and evidence about the care-climate nexus. That would be including, for example, quantifying the climate care burden, doing a co-benefit analysis, as was just highlighted. So these are really important for climate scientists and those that are really driven by data to actually bring the data to speak as part of this advocacy. Also need to identify scalable local solutions and innovations, and also test some innovative care financing models suitable for the LMIC context. And that includes the care credits that was just mentioned. So our goal is to ensure that the care economy mobilizes action and receives the attention and the resources that it deserves within the climate decision-making processes and financing. So critical to this effort and for any discussion moving forward will be centering the experiences of those most impacted by care and climate emergencies and elevating the voices of women and their leadership in dialogues and decision-making. And this is something that we're very keen in fostering as this discussion moves forward towards implementation. So watch out for the space. Again, just to say, you know, it was a really privilege to be working alongside the WITS team and to supporting them in this groundbreaking work. And we look forward to continued engagement and interaction with you all as our work further evolves. Thank you.
Right.
Over to you.
Thank you so much, Martha. So I think that then brings us to the close of the event today. Let me firstly thank Martha for her generous words and for her support throughout this project. Thanks to all of our discussants today. A special thank you to Sonia and Juliet Taylor, who did the bulk of the work on kind of developing the framework. I'm really grateful to both of you. Thanks to the kind of to our advisory group that kind of helped us kind of to develop the framework. So please do kind of download the document, look out for all of the think pieces, and look out for our ongoing work in this field. Finally, let me thank you all for joining us today. We're kind of extremely grateful for all of the feedback that you've shared with us, and we look forward to engaging with you on these issues further. So with that, let me then say good night and or good morning if you kind of in the Northern Hemisphere, and kind of please do share the paper as widely as you can.